My daughter's groom punched me at the wedding and said, "Get out." But my daughter's reaction made him shocked. I stood at the edge of the lake resort, watching my daughter's wedding, a dream that never had room for me. The white chairs, the music, the soft chatter of guests. The guest of honor, they called it, though they'd seated me near the kitchen doors, where the smell of garlic and smoke leaked through every few minutes. When Clara saw me walk in, she smiled the way polite people smile at strangers they hope will leave soon. "Mom," she whispered sharply, "please don't make a scene. Stay in the back, don't talk too much. I don't want people to pity you." I forced a smile. "I've been pitied before, sweetheart. I survived it." Her eyes darted around, checking if anyone heard. "Just behave," she said, turning away before I could answer. "If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening." The ceremony began under the arbor, the lake behind them glimmering like glass. Dylan, her groom, looked every inch the charming man people believed him to be. When he caught sight of me, his smirk didn't hide. "Guess they put her near the kitchen," he said to his groomsmen. "That's where she belongs." I pretended not to hear, but my hands tightened around the envelope. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. A few guests laughed softly. Clara didn't. She didn't defend me either. I sat down, folding my hands around the small white envelope I had carried for weeks, the paper now warm from my palm. Inside was everything left of my life, $500,000 from a memorial fund that bore my husband's name. Richard had died 33 years ago, running into a burning factory to save a child. They called it a heroic suicide, a phrase cruel enough to outlive the truth. They said no one sane runs into fire. Clara believed them. I never corrected her. You can't defend the truth to someone who's already decided. It embarrasses them. The officiant's voice was warm, professional, and distant. I didn't hear much of it. My eyes stayed on my daughter, radiant and trembling with excitement. Her dress the same ivory shade as the one I'd worn decades ago. The one she'd refused to borrow, saying, "I want mine to be new, not something from your sad life." I remembered that, but I didn't resent her. I'd spent too many years loving her through the noise. When the vows ended and applause filled the air, Clara and Dylan walked back down the aisle together, perfect in everyone's eyes. I followed behind at a distance, clutching the envelope tighter. At the reception, waiters moved quickly, carrying trays of champagne and laughter. The laughter that followed was sharper this time, more confident. Clara smiled at him, uncertain, but didn't stop him. They cut the cake. The guests cheered. The DJ played a love song from the 80 seconds. Then the master of ceremonies called, "And now, the mother of the bride will say a few words." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara froze. Dylan whispered something to her, his hand tightening at her waist. I stood, slowly, holding my envelope. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. "I won't take long," I said. "I just wanted to give my daughter something her father would have wanted her to have." I held up the envelope. "This isn't a gift from me, it's a reminder of him." I placed it on the table before Clara. "It's not much, but it's all that's left of your father's fire." The room fell silent for a breath. Then Dylan snatched the envelope, laughing. $500,000? Oh, that's generous. Must be guilt money, huh? He turned toward the guests, smirking. "The government must have felt sorry for you, Mrs. Rowe." I looked at him quietly. "No, Dylan. They respected him." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Respect doesn't buy class, old woman." I didn't answer. His words rolled over me like smoke, unpleasant but familiar. I could see Clara's lips parting, unsure whether to defend me or stay silent. She chose silence. She always did. I turned to leave, slow and deliberate. Dylan followed, still smiling, his breath thick with champagne. "You think money makes you madder?" he said. And then, before anyone could react, his hand flashed. The sound of his fist against my cheek cracked through the room like a bottle breaking. My body stumbled sideways, caught the edge of a table, plates and glasses shattering around me. For a moment, everything went silent, music, chatter, laughter gone. All that existed was the ringing in my ears and the taste of blood. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Did he just hit her?" Dylan shouted, "Get out! You've embarrassed us enough." I straightened slowly, one hand against the table, the other holding my face. The world tilted, but I stayed on my feet. I looked at my daughter. Her mascara had started to run, but her feet wouldn't move. I wanted her to say something, but she didn't. I met Dylan's eyes, my voice quiet but firm. "That check wasn't a gift," I said. "It was a mirror." And then I walked out, past the stairs, past the pity, past the man who thought he'd won. By the time I reached the door, the security staff had already moved toward him, but no one stopped me. Security had already stepped forward, but no one dared to touch him. That's how power works, loud, drunk, and unchallenged. I could hear the music start again behind me, forced and hollow, as I stepped into the cold evening air. The lake wind hit my skin, and I realized I wasn't shaking. I'd been hit harder by silence before. I used to think silence was the highest form of grace. When people whispered about my husband, I told myself that time would clear the smoke. But it never did. It only thickened. Richard was a firefighter. 33 years ago, a warehouse in our town caught fire after a gas leak. He went in twice, bringing out 2 men before the roof began to collapse. They said a child was still inside, and he went back. He never came out. The papers called it a heroic suicide, a strange, cruel phrase that stuck to my name like soot. They said no man runs back into fire unless he's running from something worse. Clara was a baby when it happened. She grew up not remembering her father, only the stories. And in small towns, stories rot before they fade. By the time she was 10, her classmates whispered that her father killed himself because of me. By 15, she believed it. When she left for college, I gave her a box of his belongings, his badge, his watch, a small leather journal where he'd written about every rescue. She never opened it. She told me once, "Mom, it's depressing. I want to move forward." I didn't stop her. I thought maybe moving forward meant healing, but it meant moving away. Years later, when she met Dylan, I knew immediately he was the kind of man who studies people's weaknesses before he studies their faces. Charming, ambitious, sharp enough to cut, and smooth enough to make you thank him for the wound. The first time we met, he shook my hand and said, "So, you're the famous widow. Must have been hard, being married to a man like that." I asked what he meant. He smiled. "A man who runs into fire probably didn't find much warmth at home." I should have said something then. I should have stood up for Richard, for myself. But I'd learned that defending yourself only feeds the rumor, so I smiled and said, "He found enough warmth to save a life." Dylan laughed politely, but his eyes told me the conversation wasn't over. Months passed. Clara called less and less. When she did, she spoke in careful sentences, as if I were a client, not a mother. "Dylan says you should sell the house," she said once. "It's too much for you." I told her I was fine, that her father built this house with his own hands, that I wanted to keep it. She sighed. "You're stuck in the past, Mom. You need to let go." What she meant was, let go of him, of what he was, of what people say he did. Dylan began managing her finances. He talked her into buying a condo, a new car, things that screamed success. Clara wanted to be nothing like Menno thrift stores. No small-town kindness, no waiting by the window with coffee gone cold. She wanted polish. He gave her polish, and she mistook it for love. When I visited, I could feel her unease the moment I stepped inside. She'd glance around, as if checking whether the neighbors could see. "Mom, please don't wear those shoes next time," she said once. "They're fine," I replied. "They're clean." She smiled tight. "They're just old." That was how it started. Small corrections, tiny rejections wrapped in courtesy. Each one a reminder that I embarrassed her without meaning to. The day she told me about the wedding, she added quickly, "It's going to be very formal. Dylan's family is particular." I asked, "Will they want me there?" She said, "Of course, Mom. Just keep things simple." Dylan's opinion of me grew bolder with time. He didn't hide it anymore. At dinner one night, he said, "Your mother made your father miserable. She's toxic. That's why she clings to you guilt." Clara didn't defend me. She pressed her napkin to her lap and said nothing. I looked at her, not him. "Do you believe that?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. "I just think you make things heavy sometimes. Dad's death, the stories, all of it's too much." I nodded. "Then maybe I'm not the one carrying it anymore." She winced. "Mom, I just want to build a life different from yours." I said quietly, "Just don't build it on shame." That night, after they left, I sat alone with the box I'd once given her. The leather journal still smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. I flipped it open to a page I'd never been able to read before. Richard's handwriting was rough, smudged. It said, "If anything happens, tell Clara I went back because I heard a child crying. I wanted her to know that bravery doesn't come from despair, it comes from love." I ran my finger over the words until the ink blurred. No one had ever seen that page but me. I had kept it safe for 30 years, waiting for the right time to show her. But now, I wasn't sure she would ever want to see it. Still, I tucked the journal inside a drawer with the papers from the memorial fund. I didn't keep them for money. I kept them because they were proof that his life had meant something more than a rumor. Proof that his death brought not shame, but dignity. And if my daughter couldn't see that yet, then I would carry it for both of us, until she could. The reception hall gleamed like a magazine spread crystal chandeliers, champagne pyramids, white roses everywhere. I stood near the back, invisible, as laughter rippled through the crowd. When the MC announced, "Now a few words from the mother of the bride," heads turned, not out of respect but curiosity. The kind you give a car wreck you can't look away from. Clara froze, her hand tightening on Dylan's arm. He leaned in, whispering something that made her smile just enough for the cameras. I knew that smile. It was the one she wore when she wanted me silent. I walked to the front, every step echoing against the polished floor. My shoes scuffed. They didn't belong there. The microphone crackled as I adjusted it. "I won't take much of your time," I said. My voice steady, though my hands trembled. "I just want to give my daughter something her father would have wanted her to have." I held up the white envelope, thin but heavy with the weight of what it carried. "It's not much," I continued, "but it's all that's left of your father's sacrifice." For a moment, the room was quiet. Then Dylan snatched the envelope from my hand and tore it open. The paper of the check glinted under the lights. His eyebrows shot up. "500,000? He barked a laugh. "Oh, the government must have felt sorry for you." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were lazy. That kind of cruelty doesn't take imagination, it just takes a hollow man. "No," I said softly. "They respected him." He tilted his head, smirk curling at one corner. "Respect doesn't buy class." A few guests chuckled. The sound spread, nervous but willing. No one wanted to seem out of place by defending me. Even Clara kept her eyes on the champagne glass in her hand. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I stayed calm. "You're right," I said quietly. "It doesn't buy class. It reveals it." That only made him angrier. He stepped closer, his breath sharp with whiskey. "You think money makes you matter?" His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. "You think waving your dead husband's charity fund around makes you important?" I tried to pull back, but he held tighter. My skin burned under his fingers. "Let go, Dylan." He didn't. "Say it," he hissed. "Say you wanted to feel powerful for once." Something flickered in his eyes, fear, masquerading as dominance. And then, suddenly, he swung. The blow landed against my cheekbone with a sound that didn't belong in a wedding hall. Plates shattered as I fell against the nearest table, glasses crashing to the floor. The music stopped mid-beat. I heard someone scream, and then nothing. Blood trickled down my chin, warm and metallic. My left knee throbbed where it hit the floor. I blinked through the blur and saw the horror on a few guests' faces, their frozen hands, the way no one moved to help. Clara stood by the cake, her bouquet trembling. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Dylan towered over me, his voice booming through the stunned silence. "Get out, you pathetic old leech. You've ruined her day." No one contradicted him. He was tall, loud, confident, the kind of man people mistake for right just because he sounds certain. I pressed my palm to the floor, slowly pushing myself upright. The taste of copper filled my mouth, but I refused to spit. I wouldn't give them that image. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the panic behind his rage. He hadn't meant to hit me in public. He hadn't expected to lose control. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand and said, "Clear enough for everyone to hear. That check wasn't a gift, Dylan. It was a mirror." His jaw clenched. The crowd murmured, uneasy now, sensing the shift. Clara took a half step forward, then stopped again. I saw something flicker in her eye, same maybe, or awakening, but she still didn't move. I straightened my shoulders. "You always thought what I had wasn't enough," I said. "But look at you, surrounded by everything you ever wanted, and still empty." Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. I turned toward Clara. "I hope one day you remember who built your world and who burned for it." And then I walked out. The doors shut behind me, muffling the chaos inside, the frantic voices, the clatter of chairs, the sound of Clara finally crying. Outside, the evening air hit my face like cool water. My cheek was swelling fast, and I could already feel the bruise forming beneath the skin. I didn't touch it. Pain meant I was still alive, still in control of what happened next. I walked down the marble steps, past the valet who didn't know whether to stop me or salute me, and out to the road. Behind me, the music stuttered back to life, louder this time, desperate, as if volume could erase what everyone had seen. When I reached the parking lot, I paused and looked back once. Through the glass doors, I saw Clara surrounded by guests, her white dress splattered with a drop of my blood that no one dared to wipe away. Dylan stood apart, already defending himself with gestures and lies. I thought of Richard then, of the night he'd run into fire without hesitation because someone had to, and I realized that courage doesn't always look like flames. Sometimes it looks like an old woman walking away from the wreckage of a room full of people who pretended not to see. I took a deep breath, the air stinging against the split in my lip, and whispered, "You burned yourself this time, Dylan." Then I turned toward the dark road ahead, my shoes clicking against the pavement, my shadow stretching long behind me like smoke from a fire finally dying out. 3 days after the wedding, the bruise on my cheek had turned a deep shade of violet, the kind that told stories louder than words. I hadn't heard from Clara, and I didn't expect to. Silence, I'd learned, was her shield. But the world had its own timing. That morning, as I sat by the window sipping my tea, the phone rang. "Mrs. Rowe?" The voice was professional, clipped with the cadence of authority. "This is Special Agent Keller from the Federal Firefighter Memorial Division. Someone just attempted to withdraw funds from your late husband's trust account." I smiled faintly. "Did they now?" "Yes, ma'am. A man named Dylan Foster brought in a check, claiming he was acting on behalf of your daughter, Mrs. Clara Foster. The transaction flagged an automatic alert. It's registered under the Federal Firefighter Memorial Trust. He got agitated when they refused to process it. The teller said he smiled the whole time, like a man who thought the world still owed him something." I watched a ray of sunlight crawl across the kitchen counter. "Let the system do what it was built for," I said calmly. The agent paused, perhaps surprised by my composure. "You were expecting this?" "I was," I replied. "That check wasn't just a check, it was a test." Because long before the wedding, I had met with my husband's old attorney, Mr. Whitaker. He was a quiet man who still wore his veteran pin on his lapel, and when I told him I wanted to set up a protective trust in Richard's name, he didn't ask why. He simply said, "You're a smart woman, Mrs. Rowe. It's not paranoia, it's preparation." The fund was legally registered under a federal clause that protected the assets of fallen firefighters' families. Only the designated beneficiary, Clara, could access it, and only under her own verified authorization. Any other attempt would automatically trigger a fraud investigation. Whitaker had even said, "If anyone ever tries to touch this money, they'll be handling fire they can't control." So when I placed that envelope in Dylan's hand, I hadn't been naive. I had given him a mirror and a match. Later that afternoon, the news broke like a thunderclap. Groom charged, with attempting to steal firefighters' memorial fund. Man punches widow, then tries to cash her dead husband's legacy. The headlines spread across every local outlet. The story hit harder because everyone in town remembered Richard the man who'd carried 3 people out of a burning factory. They'd come to his funeral. They'd watched me raise Clara alone. They'd whispered rumors for decades, but now they knew. The truth, once buried under gossip, was ablaze again, this time in my favor. Neighbors who once avoided me now left flowers. The mayor's wife stopped by, her face flushed with embarrassment. "We always knew you were strong, Ellie," she said. I didn't bother correcting her. People always remember what flatters them most. Meanwhile, Dylan sat in a holding cell at the county jail, refusing to speak without an attorney. But the surveillance footage from the bank told its own story: his swagger as he handed over the check, his irritation when the teller questioned him, his arrogance collapsing into panic as uniformed officers walked him out. The next morning, Clara came to my door. Her mascara was gone, her hair unkempt. I opened the screen door but didn't invite her in. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't understand. They're saying Dylan tried to steal from Dad's fund. How?" I met her eyes. "Because he thought it was free money. Because he thought your father's life was a handout." Tears welled up. "I didn't know." "No," I said softly. "You didn't want to." She took a step closer. "Did you set him up?" "I gave him the opportunity to reveal himself," I replied. "He just did it faster than I expected." She sank onto the porch steps, her shoulders trembling. "He said you made Dad miserable," she murmured. "And you believed him," I said, not unkindly, "because it was easier than facing how wrong he was." The wind moved through the trees, scattering the last of the autumn leaves. For the first time in years, I felt something lift inside Menno: joy, not revenge, but release. The truth had done the heavy lifting. By evening, the story had gone national. Reporters stood outside the courthouse, cameras flashing as Dylan was escorted out in handcuffs. The sheriff gave a brief statement. "Mr. Foster is being charged with attempted bank fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of federal memorial assets." When one reporter asked, "What about the assault at the wedding?" he replied dryly, "That's a separate matter, and yes, we have witnesses." That night, I sat in the living room with Richard's journal in my lap. I opened it to a page where his handwriting, once strong and sure, trailed off mid-sentence. "If love is a fire, let it be one that warms, not one that consumes." The next morning, I woke to another call. It was Agent Keller again. "Mrs. Rowe," he said, "we wanted to inform you that the federal charges have been confirmed. Mr. Foster will be held pending trial." "Good," I said quietly. "Let justice breathe." He hesitated. "Ma'am, I have to say, in 20 years on this job, I've never seen someone plan ahead this well." I smiled. I was married to a man who planned for other people's worst days. It must have rubbed off. When I hung up, I walked outside. The air smelled like winter was coming, crisp, sharp, cleansing. Across the street, a neighbor waved awkwardly. I waved back. Inside, I found Clara's old photo album on the shelf. I flipped through the pages until I reached the picture of Richard holding her as a baby. His uniform was soot-stained, his face tired but proud. Beneath it, in his handwriting, were the words, "For her, I'd go back into any fire." That was what he'd done. That was what everyone had forgotten. Until now. Somewhere in a jail cell, Dylan was learning what it meant to play with something sacred. The fire had finally burned him too. And as I looked out the window at the gray horizon, I whispered to myself, "You saved one more life, Richard. You saved ours." The world has a cruel way of teaching humility. First it builds you high, then it lets you fall where everyone can watch. For Clara, the fall came fast. Within a week of Dylan's arrest, her company temporarily suspended her position pending investigation. They said it was standard procedure, but everyone knew what it meant. No one wants a scandal near the brand. Her phone stopped buzzing. The women who had once fought for her attention at brunch now ignored her messages. Even her college friends, the ones who'd called Dylan the perfect man, quietly unfollowed her online. She sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through hundreds of comments under the news articles. So the husband tried to rob her dead dad's fund? Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Money-hungry couple gets burned. Each one hit like a slap. She threw her phone across the couch, buried her face in her hands, and for the first time in years, let herself cry without worrying about her makeup. By nightfall, she found herself driving no destination, no plan, just the empty roads leading out of the city. The streetlights blurred through her tears. She ended up at the house she hadn't visited in months, the one at the end of Maple Street, where the porch light still burned late. When I opened the door, she didn't say a word. She stood there, her hair undone, her clothes wrinkled, the air around her heavy with defeat. "Come in," I said softly. She stepped inside, her heels clicking once on the wooden floor before she kicked them off. Her eyes wandered around the living room, the same floral wallpaper, the same framed photo of her father in uniform above the mantel. "He said you lied," she whispered finally. "That Dad killed himself, that you made him miserable." I took a slow breath and walked to the cabinet near the window. Inside was a box I had kept since the day of the funeral, worn edges, faded ribbon, the past preserved. I opened it and pulled out a single photograph. Richard in his turnout gear, soot on his cheek, holding baby Clara in one arm. The fire truck loomed behind him, its lights glowing faintly in the dusk. I handed her the photo. "He didn't die for shame," I said quietly. "He died for someone's child." She stared at the picture for a long time. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at her, my daughter, 34, and broken in a way I couldn't fix for her, not this time. "Because love doesn't need defense, Clara," I said. "It just waits. And sometimes, it waits too long." Something cracked inside her then. The tears came fast, unstoppable. She sank onto the couch, clutching the photo to her chest. "I let him make me ashamed of you," she sobbed. "I believed him when he said you ruined everything." I sat beside her and touched her hand. "No," I said softly. "You just forgot you were raised by fire." For the first time, I saw my daughter cry, not from shame, but from understanding. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, confused. "Your father ran into flames to save someone else's child," I said. "That's the blood in your veins, Clara. Not weakness, not shame, fire. And fire doesn't die when it's forgotten, it waits for air." She pressed her face into her palms. "I thought I was building a better life than yours." "You were building a life that looked good on paper," I replied, "but it was made of lies, and lies burn faster than anything." We sat there in the quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. She turned the photo over and saw what she'd never noticed before, the writing on the back, in Richard's blocky, careful script. "For Clara, so she'll always know her father never ran from fire. He ran into it." Her fingers traced the words. "He really wrote this?" "Yes," I said. "I found it the day after the funeral." She looked up at me again, eyes red, and whispered, "I don't deserve forgiveness." I shook my head. "Forgiveness isn't earned, it's recognized." We stayed like that for a while, her head resting on my shoulder, the years between us dissolving into the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of tea cooling on the counter. The same house that had seen every version of her, the toddler running down the hall, the teenager slamming the door, the adult, too proud to look back now, saw her simply as my daughter again. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "What do I do now?" I smiled faintly. "You live, you start over. You stop apologizing to people who don't deserve your apology." She nodded slowly, her tears drying. "I thought strength meant never needing anyone." "It means knowing who to need," I said. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the windows. I stood, went to the kitchen, and poured us both tea. When I returned, she was still holding the photo. "I used to hate that picture," she said softly. "I thought it was just another reminder that you couldn't let go of the past." "And now?" I asked. She smiled weakly. "Now I think it's proof that love doesn't die, it just waits for someone to remember it." I nodded, watching the reflection of the lamplight in her eyes. "Welcome back, Clara." She laughed through a tear. "You make it sound like I've been gone." "You have," I said. But you found your way home. For the first time in years, she reached out and took my hand. It was small, trembling but warm. The fire was still there, after all. It had just needed air. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, the scent of stories being rewritten. The crowd had gathered early, even the local news vans parked outside before dawn. Reporters whispered my name as they passed through security. That's her, the widow. Inside, the courtroom was a storm of murmurs and flashing cameras until the bailiff banged his gavel for order. Dylan sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit too sharp for a man in handcuffs. His hair was slicked back, his smirk rehearsed the look of a man who thought charm could still buy him freedom. Across from him, I sat beside Clara. She was steady, dressed in black, her face calm but pale. Her hand brushed mine once, briefly. It was the first time she had ever touched me in public since her wedding. That was enough. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Callahan, opened the laptop and said, "Your Honor, we'll begin with Exhibit A, the footage recovered from the wedding venue." The screen flickered to life. The room fell silent. There I was, walking to the front of the reception hall, holding that white envelope. I looked smaller on camera, older. Then Dylan appeared full of swagger, reaching for the check. The sound crackled. $500,000? Oh, the government must have felt sorry for you. Then my voice. No. They respected him. And then, the punch. Even though I'd lived it, I still flinched. The sound, that dull, heavy crack, echoed through the room. Someone in the gallery gasped. The silence afterward was complete, suffocating. Dylan's attorney shifted uncomfortably, whispering in his ear, but he stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the floor. Callahan paused the video. "Your Honor, this is the defendant, striking a 70-year-old widow during a public event. Moments after mocking the death of her husband, a decorated firefighter whose memorial trust he would attempt to defraud 3 days later." The judge adjusted his glasses, expression unreadable. "Continue." She clicked again, and the next video appeared. Bank security footage. Dylan at the teller window, smiling, handing over the check. His lips moved. "It's from her fund. She said I could handle it for my wife." The teller's polite confusion, the moment her hand reached under the counter to press the silent alarm. The arrival of uniformed officers. Dylan's face twisting from arrogance to panic. When the screen went black, Callahan turned to the judge. "The evidence speaks for itself. The defendant's intent was not only theft, but humiliation to strip this woman of dignity and profit from a hero's sacrifice." Dylan's lawyer stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, my client acted under emotional distress. The altercation at the wedding was—" "Unprovoked assault," the judge interrupted. "Continue." The lawyer faltered. He regrets his behavior deeply. As for the alleged fraud, he believed the funds were freely given. Callahan's voice cut through like a blade. Then why did he alter the endorsement signature and attempt to deposit the check under his own company name? The lawyer's silence was the longest sound in the room. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge finally spoke. His nameplate read, "Honorable Thomas Greer." And I remembered it. He was the same man who had presided over Richard's inquest all those years ago, the one who had declared his death in the line of duty. He looked at me briefly, then back at Dylan. "Mr. Foster," he said slowly, "you have been charged with assault on a senior citizen, federal bank fraud, and misuse of veteran benefits. You not only attacked a woman, you attacked the memory of a man who gave his life for others." Dylan shifted, trying to find that smirk again, but it wouldn't come. The judge leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "You stole not money, but honor, and now you'll pay with both." Someone in the audience began to clap, then everyone did. The gavel came down hard. 6 years in federal prison. Your financial licenses are permanently revoked. You will also pay restitution to the memorial fund you tried to violate. The sound of the gavel echoed through the chamber like a closing door. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking. For a moment, no one moved. Then Clara stood. The entire room turned toward her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "He thought silence was power," she said, looking directly at Dylan. But my mother taught me it's survival. And survival doesn't mean you hide, it means you speak when it matters. A few people clapped. The judge didn't stop them. Even he nodded slightly. Outside the courthouse, the story exploded. The headlines ran faster than the truth could rest. Groom who assaulted widow found guilty of federal fraud. Idaho bride's mother outsmarts her abusive son-in-law. The widow who outsmarted Wall Street. When reporters surrounded me on the steps, microphones thrust forward, I said only one thing. Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. And today, something my husband built was restored. The cameras flashed, and I could almost hear Richard's laugh somewhere in the wind, deep, quiet, proud. That night, Clara and I sat by the fireplace in my living room. The glow painted her face in gold and shadow. She looked at me, hesitant. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "What? Loving your father?" "No," she said softly, "being quiet for so long." I smiled. Silence can be a weapon or a wound. I used it as both, but today, it felt like peace. We sat there for a long time without speaking. The fire cracked gently, and I thought of Richard again, the man who'd walked into fire to save a stranger. He'd given his life for someone else's child. And somehow, after all these years, he'd saved his own too. The snow that Christmas came down like feathers, soft, relentless, erasing every harsh edge the world had left behind. There's a kind of peace that comes only after the truth has burned everything false away. By dusk, Maple Street was quiet, lit only by the warm flicker of lights from windows and the occasional crunch of boots on frozen ground. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for gingerbread cookies, the smell of cinnamon and molasses filling the air. The radio hummed an old carol from the corner, one Richard used to hum under his breath while fixing the roof or cleaning the gutters. For the first time in years, the sound didn't hurt. When the knock came at the door, I didn't jump. I just wiped my hands on my apron and opened it. Clara stood there, wrapped in a thick coat, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. Snow clung to her hair like scattered salt. She didn't say, "Merry Christmas." She didn't have to. She was holding something in her arms, wrapped in a faded flag, patterned cloth. I stepped aside, and she walked in, her boots leaving small puddles on the mat. Without a word, she crossed to the front porch and placed the bundle on the old wooden bench by the window. Carefully, she unwrapped it. It was Richard's helmet, the same one he'd worn the day he went into that fire. The edges were dented, the number still visible. Engine 47. The gold stripe had dulled, but the emblem was untouched. Her voice was soft. "It was supposed to be buried with him," she said. "But I think he'd rather stay here." I swallowed hard, walked over, and laid my hand on the helmet. The metal was cold, but beneath it I could feel something steady, as if the warmth hadn't fully left. "He's still on duty," I said. Clara looked at me then, and for the first time since she was a girl, I saw peace in her eyes, not perfect, not complete, but enough. I gestured toward the kitchen. "There's tea on the stove." She smiled faintly, looked younger that night, not by years, but by forgiveness, brushed a bit of snow from her sleeve, and followed me in. The house was small, but it had grown big again with her inside it. She sat at the table while I poured the tea, steam curling between us like the breath of old forgiveness. "I didn't think I'd be welcome," she said finally. "You always were," I replied. "You just forgot the way back." We sipped in silence. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in quiet. The tree in the corner twinkled with the same handmade ornaments we'd used for decades, the paper star she made in kindergarten, the cracked glass bell Richard bought at a gas station on their first Christmas together. After a while, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were trembling but warm. "Mom," she whispered, "I used to think love had to be proven, but maybe it just has to be remembered." I squeezed her hand gently. "Love doesn't need to shout, Clara. Sometimes it just sits beside you until you notice it's still there." We didn't talk after that. There was nothing left to explain. The fire between us had burned everything false away, leaving only what mattered. Outside, the streetlights glowed against the snow like candles in glass. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. We sat together, two silhouettes in the soft golden light, with the helmet resting on the porch just beyond the window. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I thought that maybe forgiveness wasn't something you spoke, it was something you lived. That night, we didn't say, "I'm sorry." We didn't say, "I forgive you." We just stayed. And sometimes, that's the clearest forgiveness there is. A year later, winter came softer, not with bitterness, but with quiet grace. The headlines had faded, the noise had moved on, and life had settled into something steady again. Clara had changed, not just in posture or words, but in purpose. She now worked for the Idaho Fire Department, not as a firefighter, but as a community outreach officer, organizing fundraisers, family support programs, and a scholarship in her father's name, the Richard Rowe Memorial Grant for Young Recruits. Every month, she visited new cadets, telling them about the man who had run into fire to save a stranger's child, and about how legacy wasn't something you inherited, but something you earned by remembering where you came from. When people asked her why she did it, she always smiled and said, "Because my father didn't just fight fires, he lit the kind that saves people." Reporters wanted interviews, of course. They wanted her mother's quote, "the widow who outsmarted the system." But Ellie never appeared. She didn't attend the press events, didn't pose for cameras. She'd had her share of public eyes. Instead, she wrote a short note to her late husband's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, who had stood by her through every storm. It read, "We didn't win by revenge, but by remembering who we are. Richard once told me, fire only destroys when untended, but when cared for, it gives warmth." Whitaker framed the letter and kept it in his office, beside the case file labeled "The Foster Trial." Christmas returned again, this time without the ache. The town square glowed with lanterns, carolers' voices drifted through the air. On the porch of the little house at the end of Maple Street, two women sat wrapped in wool blankets, mugs of cocoa in their hands. Snow fell gently, layering the world in silver. On the small wooden table between them lay a few things. A framed family photo, Richard in uniform, Clara as a baby in Ellie's arms, and the old white envelope, worn and creased, but still legible. "For my daughter, from her father's fire." Clara ran her thumb over the faded ink. "It's strange," she said softly. "I used to think that line meant money. Now I know it was something else." Ellie smiled, eyes glinting in the lamplight. It always was. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't empty, it was full, like a held breath before a song. A breeze drifted across the porch, flickering the candle they'd placed beside the photo. The flame danced once, twice, then went out not abruptly, but gently, as if it had finally finished its duty. Ellie watched the smoke curl into the night air. "He finally got his piece," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Clara turned to her, eyes wet but calm. And so did we. They sat there, mother and daughter, watching the snow fall, each flake catching the porch light for just a moment before vanishing into the white below. Inside, the radio played an old Christmas hymn. The world was still, and for once, nothing hurt. Ellie reached over, took her daughter's hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. The warmth between their palms was enough to melt whatever cold remained. No speeches, no apologies. Just two survivors, bound not by blood or guilt anymore, but by something purer understanding. And as the night deepened, the reflection of the porch light shimmered across the snow like embers. Richard's helmet still sat by the door, its golden stripe catching the faint glow from the house. The flame had gone out, yes, but the fire their fire lived on. And that was Ellie's story. A story not of revenge, but of remembrance. Of a woman who refused to let cruelty define her, and a daughter who finally learned that love doesn't vanish, it just waits to be found again. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness, courage, and truth still matter, don't forget to subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more powerful tales just like this one. Every story here keeps the voices of women like Ellie alive, those who have walked through fire, faced betrayal, and still found light on the other side. Hit that subscribe button, share this story, and help us keep spreading strength, justice, and love, one true story at a time. This is Grandma True Stories, where every scar tells a victory.